views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey folks, here for the Bronx Buzz one more time. It's always great to be with you and of course with our Bronx reporters. Tonight we have two really interesting reporters. To me, it's really at the core of what Bronx media is about. Two bright young reporters who take very seriously what they do and also work very hard at trying to bring you something that you didn't know about. So I'm pleased to welcome Eddie Small from DNA Info. Nice to have you.
Hi.
And
Thanks for
Anthony
having me.
Capote from the Riverdale Press. Nice to have you, sir.
Thank you.
And as people probably know, every week we bring a Bronx Reporters Roundtable together to talk about the things they're writing about, give us a little more insight as to what the media is all about in the Bronx, and also give you a chance to get a little different perspective maybe on your neighborhood and on your community and the borough of the Bronx. So let's start with you, Anthony, and the Riverdale Press. You've got a number of things going on. Let's start with a couple of hyper-local issues, so to speak. On Riverdale Avenue, there's a Verizon store, right? And
Yes.
That store got robbed a couple of times, right?
Four times.
4 times. Seems a little strange that one store would be hit 4 different times. In what span of time? A month? 2 months? A year?
3 months. So,
3 months.
Or well, actually, probably more like 2.5.
Wow.
So from the end of June, someone burglarized it, and the NYPD was able to catch them very, very quickly, like within a couple of hours. According to the commanding officer in the 50th precinct, that first burglary was done by a gang based out of Upper Manhattan that was going into parts of the Bronx and
they were
Manhattan.
looking for phones?
They were looking for safes. So they would break into stores and they would take a safe. So this first burglary was really bizarre, and they carried the safe out into the street and it burst open.
I'm
on
sorry
the
for laughing. It's
street.
a serious matter and it's illegal. Don't try it at home.
So the safe bursts open and these 5 guys just pick up as many of the phones from the safe as they can and they make off. And then, of course, the funny thing was that the safe was on the street for the next day because no one could move it because it was a live crime scene.
Safe. Oh, it was a live crime scene. So that happened, and then is there any way to trace why this same store was hit again and again?
That is the interesting thing. So the next 3 times, it was all the same guy from Yonkers that would just come down and he'd throw a rock through the window, go in, grab a handful of whatever was right by the door,
So
and walk out.
It wasn't money, it was a matter of they wanted the phones.
It was merchandise. So he was stealing headphones and Beats by Dre merchandise. And the reason that the cops gave me was that they didn't want to buy a shutter for a long time.
What do you mean?
Like
Oh,
those
you mean
little shutter
Verizon
gates,
didn't want-
Verizon didn't want to buy one. So instead of buying a shutter, they just kept getting robbed by this guy who was just throwing a rock
they
through the
eventually
window.
caught the guy.
They eventually caught the guy.
You know what this says to me, and I wonder, and I'm making a presumption here, whether it's Verizon or it's the local guy who would be responsible, and that tells you less about Verizon, or maybe it tells you a lot about Verizon, or about the nature of running a small business, because they don't want to, those metal gates can get expensive.
They can get expensive. To my understanding, there was a miscommunication between the owner of the franchise, because they're not a Verizon like retail store.
Right.
They're a licensed retailer. And then Verizon company, they were struggling over who was supposed to pay for that shutter, and
That's exactly what I was saying. Is that it's not just that somebody was too cheap. It's a much more complex relationship, and it gives you kind of a larger picture of what's going on between franchisees and the franchisor, as it were. Another local story, a place that I have been to a number of times. I like the food. They make really good salads, frankly. Riverdale City Grill, kind of a popular place, but there are neighbors that want to close it down. This is also a little that's Riverdale Avenue, right?
That's that's on Riverdale.
The other one was Johnson Avenue.
No, the Verizon is Riverdale and 259.
On Riverdale North. Okay.
Yeah, and this is on Riverdale and 236.
Okay.
This one bar, as both a journalist who has covered this and a Manhattan College student, I will explain.
Who has been in that bar.
Who has been in that bar, yes. I will explain to you why this bar is just now the next on the list for the residents. A couple of years back, there was
Don't take a ton of time because
I won't.
And Eddie's got a lot of stuff.
A couple of years back, there was an issue with some of the local bars on Broadway catering to some of the younger students.
Right.
The president of Manhattan College went out and said, if I catch any of my kids in your bar, I'll have you shut down.
Really?
Sure enough,
Because they were underage.
Because they were underage. So sure enough, the kids have just kept moving north. So last year, it was Fenwick's Bar and Grill that the residents said, it's too loud, it's too much, you need to shut them down. Fenwick's now is for seniors only. They scan IDs, they don't let anyone in.
Which they should. I mean,
which they should, of course. Like, you don't want young kids to be drinking and being rowdy. But
and I'm only smiling because, let's face it, Anthony is how far removed from that. But now he's older and more mature, and he understands the rules, and we appreciate it.
And then now it's just in River City, and if you're there on the weekend at night, it is crowded. There's a lot of people in there, and a lot of people that, again, as a Manhattan College student, I knew
do you think
were
they're
younger
going to
than
get closed down? I'd hate to see it. It's a nice place.
They just took two measures. One, any out-of-state ID they take and they put in a binder because fake IDs are more likely to be from out of state. So if you have a fake ID, you don't want to give it to someone and put in a binder because if someone calls about noise, then suddenly the cops ask for the binder and you've committed a felony.
You're alleging and hypothesizing that it is actually underage people that are causing the problem, or at least filling the place.
It's being filled with a little bit of everybody. It's just that it was traditionally like a college junior and senior bar, and it was for people over 21, and then like the people under 21 still want to go somewhere. And
well, they can't drink legally, and
they can't drink legally, and they can't.
The rules. That's the way.
It's the only way that I can reconcile it.
Eddie Small from DNA Info. Let's go through some of the things you have written about. You did a story about correction officers being convicted who had beaten up a guy at Rikers Island.
A group of 8 correction officers on Friday.
Is there anything significant about this, or real newsworthy, other than the fact that it was important to report?
I think it really speaks to the new district attorney's priorities. Darcel Clark, since she's come into office at the beginning of the year, has really made trying to reform Rikers Island a top priority, and she's really put a lot of stress on that and a lot of emphasis on that. So the fact that these 8 correction officers were tried and convicted and sentenced, I think she views that as a way to show that I'm an UDA and I am putting a lot of emphasis on fixing a lot of the problems that have been going on at Rikers Island for a while.
And so if you do wrong, we're not going to just sweep it under the rug and say, well, this is how business is done.
If you do wrong, whether you're an inmate or a correction officer,
right?
We're gonna.
How much time did they get? Significant?
It's gonna. I mean, a lot of the cases are gonna go to appeal. They were sentenced to, I believe, the minimum was 4.5 years,
that's
and
a lot of time.
The max was 6.5.
And that's significant. And certainly for corrections officers to be behind bars, that becomes even more difficult for them. So interesting, and I guess the new DA flexing her muscles. Also, a story about the worst landlord or landlords. Tell me about that.
This was Ved Parkash. He is currently #1 on public advocate Letitia James's list of the worst landlords in New York City. And some tenants have gotten more and more vocal in public about demanding repairs at his building on 825 Girard Avenue, kind of in the Yankee Stadium area, the South Bronx. I looked at some of their apartments earlier this week. They've got some door frames that are basically falling apart. There are a lot of cracks all over the walls, cracks in the ceilings, and one woman in particular has a pretty gigantic rust stain on the bottom of her bathtub, and she can't really use the bathtub to take a bath.
Right.
So
It's just horrible. Listen, this is not the first time we've talked about these things. The problem has been over the years is dealing with these landlords. I mean, you know, some people have suggested, and whether it can be part of the law or not, make them live in some of the apartments. As a, you know, you stay there for 6 months, and then you tell me what it's like to have to live like that. But what is going to be the penalty for this landlord, and then what is kind of the you know, the fix up for the tenants?
I mean, we're gonna have to wait and see what happens going forward with this. I know right now the tenants are not taking any legal action against their landlord. I think they're hoping to, you know, get their concerns out in the public more and put some pressure on him to actually fix the apartments. I do know, you know, it's definitely a possibility going forward that they'll try and take him to court.
And well, take them to court. I mean, that also, of course, we all know becomes a big issue because tenants have to be organized and somebody's got to pay for a lawyer. I mean, this is a very complex problem. But then, of course, a lot of times they get the bank involved and they literally remove this property from this landlord. But if he's the worst landlord, allegedly, at least according to
the public advocate's office,
worst landlord, presumably there are more than just this one building.
Yeah, I think the list said he had 11 buildings overall.
Wow.
And this is just one of them, and tenants there not too happy.
An ongoing problem, and what it really speaks to, not only for the tenants in that particular building, but it really affects the neighborhood. It affects the kids who go to school and have to live in those buildings. It affects the health care in the Bronx. I mean, to me, this is one of the root and core issues that for years, since we've been doing this show and certainly our other show, Bronx Talk, have had to deal with. Let's do a couple of light things. You wrote about this photographer, this art exhibit. This is a nice story.
So it's Matteo.
It's not all blood and guts, folks.
No. There's an artist from Europe. He was in the Bronx last summer, and one of the things he noticed when he was here is he saw a lot of similarities between people's perception versus the reality of the Bronx, and people's perception versus the reality of his neighborhood in Paris. He said both places went through pretty rough patches with crime and violence back in the 70s, 80s, and both places have improved a lot since then, but from the outside perspective, they're still viewed as, you know, pretty dangerous places, and people
Their reputation
don't have
precedes
exactly.
them,
So he noticed that about the Bronx and noticed the same thing about his own neighborhood, and he took a lot of photos while he was here of people who just live and work in the Bronx. And early October, those photographs and photographs of people from his neighborhood in Paris are going to be going up at one of the libraries in Paris, and the idea is just to kind of compare and contrast the two neighborhoods.
Right, so we will be getting a bus and we'll be driving over there to Paris. I'd like to see that, of course, in the Bronx, so they're plans
They're
to bring
working
it in.
on it, yeah.
I'd like to, I was hoping you were going to say at the Bronx Museum, but no, okay. Well, on the other hand, we'll all go to Paris. That's fine.
That's fine,
Want
too.
to go?
I've heard
Get
good
the whole,
things.
we take 1.3 million people up there. Last thing I just want to mention, I took note of it, and you know that because I contacted you right after, the John Lennon bus. This is a bus founded by John Lennon's widow, Yoko Ono, and it's kind of a music studio that they bring around. And the reason I know, because I think it was about 6 or 7 years ago on our other show, Bronx Talk, we did a thing because they had stopped by DeWitt Clinton High School and gave the kids a chance to record music. And so what's new with the John Lennon bus in the Bronx?
Was back there pretty recently, I believe on Friday. They went to another school in the Bronx, and Prince Royce, if you're familiar with him at all, he's a pretty popular Latino artist. He was there with the bus, and they were just helping the kids, record their own song and just kind of express their creativity.
Are they coming back, or it's done? It was like a one shot deal project?
I don't believe they're coming back to that specific high school,
Right.
at least in the immediate future. I would kind of assume they'll make another trip to New York again.
Right.
but,
It's such a great project. Listen,
Yeah.
folks who watch this show and our other show know that I would advocate, for music and kids in schools more than just about anything. So, and certainly if it comes out of John Lennon, of course, one of the
Yeah.
legendary musicians of all time. So, it's a great thing. Eddie Small from DNA Info. Anthony Capote from the Riverdale Press. We're going to take a break, and then Anthony's going to tell us how he spent his summer vacation, and it wasn't much of a vacation. And we're going to use that really to talk about media and how people absorb media in the Bronx. Very interesting concept, and so we'll have more on The Buzz right after this.
Hello, good people of the Bronx and beyond. Welcome to A Life in Art.
It's not always easy being a dad.
Do you have panda asthma too? Does that run in the family?
This is the home of the most priceless kung fu artifacts.
But when you make an effort,
Dad, we're not supposed to touch anything.
Oh, sorry. Go along, son!
it's always worth it.
Whoa! Master!
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
I am gonna get you. I'm gonna get you.
Call 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov to learn more.
Oh my God, girl! Oh, Shane, look out! Hamilton was adopted from a rescue in 2008. He really likes to be around people. And as soon as I start to make my breakfast, Hamilton is right there. I get out my mat and I'm doing a downward dog and he's underneath. He's quite the pug about town. He gets invited to a lot of parties. He knows he's a pretty big deal. I mean, look at this little face. How could you not love him?
Okay, back with you on the Bronx Buzz, and it is Eddie Small from DNA Info and Anthony Capote from the Riverdale Press who are with us. On the way over, before the show, Anthony was telling me about a really interesting project he's been working on, and it's coming to fruition, I guess, this coming weekend, right?
Yep.
So tell us what it is.
So I had the wonderful pleasure of working on a research grant through Manhattan College, oddly enough, in their time between Riverdale City Grill trips. But I got to I got to conduct a survey of Northwest Bronx residents, and I got to basically ask them, how do you get your news? And my fundamental question was that we have all these conventional wisdoms and beliefs that I'm sure you guys are familiar with.
Right.
That poor people read tabloids, they read the Daily News, they read the New York Post, and rich guys read the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. And I really wanted to challenge that. I wanted to say, well, there is no quantitative evidence that suggests that that's
People
actually
of
true.
lower incomes read the tabloids.
Read the tabloids, and people with higher incomes read broadsheets.
Well, okay, I'm not going to challenge that yet, but go ahead.
So I conducted this survey of 57 residents, which, albeit is not a full sample of the Northwest Bronx, it's 59,000 residents, but it's pretty good in the sense that the way that the incomes are broken down
So,
in my
I mean,
sample.
people would assume that people who read the Riverdale Press, frankly, would be better to do than people maybe who read the South Bronx articles that Eddie puts
Exactly.
out. So what was the result? Or
What
are we
I
still
found-
kind of in flux with it?
What I found mostly is that a lot of what we believe about how people buy the news on the basis of social class is really misguided, or at least out of date. The only people in my survey that said that they read tabloids as much as they read broadsheet newspapers were people in the second highest income quintile that I studied.
How interesting.
People making $82,000 a year, roughly, said that they love tabloids, and everybody else pretty much said they love broadsheets.
Wow.
They love international news. They care about these things. And one thing I thought was really interesting was that same quintile was also the only one that said that they care about sports.
Ah, well, we're going to put that aside for the
Group
moment.
that read the tabloids?
Yeah.
Okay.
There-
Eddie, when you write the stories, and maybe something, let's say, about the story that we talked about, like about the worst landlord, and that's a significant story, not only because of that particular building, but of its implications for many people in the Bronx. Do you have a sense who reads it? I mean, I guess with media nowadays, you might have a better sense because you can kind of track who clicks and that kind of thing. What's your sense of who reads the stuff that you write?
I mean, I'm always trying to write for an audience in the South Bronx. Like, that's sort of the whole goal, is I'm writing about the South Bronx, mainly for the people in the South Bronx. And obviously, I want as wide and as broad an audience as I can, so I would hope that at least some of the stories are attracting interest from outside neighborhoods or maybe even outside New York City, but definitely first and foremost, writing about the South Bronx for people.
And this is, forgive my ignorance in this, do you have a sense, because we could say and make a judgment, and maybe it's a generalization about a digital divide, and say, well, people with lower incomes don't have access to computers, but nowadays just about everybody's got a little phone, and they can read it on their phone. Do you have a sense that some of the people that maybe you'd like to have read the stuff that you write don't have access to it? Or do you feel like, you know what, I put it out and everybody absorbs it?
I mean, I would assume that at least, some people in the Bronx don't have access to the internet, just as some people in pretty much every community don't. I guess I don't have, concrete numbers behind internet access in the borough, at least off the top of my head. I mean, just walking around there every day, you see pretty much everyone has their smartphone out at some point.
So let me ask you this, and it's really for all three of us, because I mean, my medium is obviously here at TV, and you do a print newspaper, which is online, and yours is an online publication. What kind of feedback do you get? Do people stop you in the street? I mean, people would have to know you. I mean, you're not on TV, frankly, like I am.
It happens sometimes.
But
and
people,
it's kind of cool.
Do people talk to you about the stuff you've written personally, other than calling up or email and things like that?
I mean, in terms of bumping into people on the street, they don't really talk about.
But
like, if I get recognized, they pretty much just say, "Oh, you're from."
I'm
DNA
less concerned
Info."
about the recognition. Then forget the recognition part. Let's talk about. Do you get emails from people who say,
sometimes.
"This was good," or "This is interesting," or "You got this right," or "You got this wrong"?
Yeah.
And what kind of feedback? And is it voluminous? Do you get a lot?
I mean, I don't get it with every story. It's generally, if a story strikes a nerve with a certain group of people, or if, they want to do a follow-up, if they have had like a similar problem to this, then that's the type of feedback, and it mostly comes through email. I think my email is probably the most.
Anthony, the Riverdale Press, of course, has a much longer legacy than DNA Info, so it probably has many more readers that are used to it. You get feedback?
There's
Other than politicians who he tells me about that give him a hard time? I know all about it, folks.
So an old Riverdale Press editor once told me that the photo editor for the Riverdale Press is the single most loved member of the community. The politics reporter, not so much. But I love it, because when you go to these meetings and you show up and you do like the old shoe leather reporting kind of idea of going to public forums, talking to residents pretty constantly, you do kind of get recognized and you do get feedback, especially a paper like the Press, that is so well loved and so liked in the community. Yeah, typically like once a week I'll get an email about something or just a follow-up.
I'm gonna. Nobody asked me, but I'm gonna tell you, I get more feedback, especially nowadays, on the debates that I moderate than anything else I do. I could do this like we did a show about, and which I thought we really broke the news in some ways about the explosion of heroin in the Bronx. And I thought it was one of the best shows we'd ever done. But nobody really talked about that. But boy, when I went to an event the other night and people came up to me, boy, that debate you did in the 33rd Senatorial District and the 36th was, and all that. I'm going to put forth something I'm sorry, not going to have enough time. I believe, and I was quoted in the New York Times many years ago about this, that part of the poverty in the Bronx is a poverty of information. And that one, it's almost the same thing. Do you think we're doing a good job? And again, you got about 15 seconds. Are we doing a good job at covering the Bronx? I mean all of us who do this.
I mean, I would say yes, but with the caveat that obviously we can do better. And I think we're always striving to do better and do more.
All right. Boy, that was a political answer. I like that. That's cool.
It's the truth.
I think that online media is really bridging the information gap and the access gap. But yeah, we can do better. There's enough of us at this point that we can do better coverage.
And now ask me, how are we doing? Okay, I'm going to answer it. I think in the areas that get covered, certainly Riverdale with the Riverdale Press, Norwood with the Norwood News, the areas in the South Bronx that Eddie covers, and there are many other areas that get covered, there are still black holes, so to speak, pockets of neighborhoods that don't get covered. I know one in Claremont, that there is so much going on in there. There's great positive energy, and nobody knows about it because it's outside of everybody's area. So anyway, that's our impression of that. Anthony Capote from the Riverdale Press, you'll come back, right?
I'll be back.
Tomorrow? No.
Yeah, sure.
Eddie Small from DNA Info. Great.
I've already
you
been
guys,
back. So.
Yeah, right. you guys are just great. I love having you here. And folks, we're going to see you again Monday night for Bronx Talk, that other show. And our 22nd anniversary coming up in 2 weeks. That's crazy. Good night. See ya.
We are neighbors and best friends.
I love my sister.
My heart doesn't see race. Love is love.
Our family is no less than any other family.